everybody. It's a good way to start Monday. Welcome to the first session of the first day of RSAC 2023. This session is Making Standards Safe for Democracy, Rebuilding the U.S. Standards team. We have Mike Boyle and Jessica Fitzgerald-McKay from the NSA Center for Cybersecurity Standards. So welcome them.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. My name is Jessica Fitzgerald-McKay, like Joel said. I'm here with my colleague Mike Boyle, and we lead NSA's Center for Cybersecurity Standards. That's the organization at NSA that coordinates NSA's standards engagement in different standards organizations that matter for national security systems. Today we're going to talk about three things. The first is why standards are important, not just for national security systems, but for all of us in our everyday lives. The second is about current threats we're seeing to the standards development environment. And then third, we'll talk a little bit about how we all and democracies around the world can work together to protect those critical standards development environments that we all depend on. So, talking about why standards are important to all of us, I want to kind of start with a bit of a thought exercise. I want you to kind of envision about 50 years in the future, right, where we have actual smart cities that we're all living in. And so I want you to sort of imagine, in this world, your car is communicating between it and its traffic lights, and it's communicating with the parking garage that you're trying to find a spot in. All that communication is happening seamlessly without your intervention or engagement, and in a secure way that sort of protects all of the critical information that's being collected about you. And a lot more is going on in the background, too, stuff that didn't make for a very pretty slide, so I didn't put it on, like wastewater management and energy control and maybe public health initiatives, like how we monitor wastewater for symptoms of COVID in your community, right? All that's sort of happening in the background. Internet of Things devices are collecting this data, and AI in the background is aggregating in a way that makes all of our lives better. But these technologies aren't like inherently good, right? They can be used for things that we don't want to see in our world, like profiling the person who's driving that car, knowing where they are for dubious reasons, not helping you park your car. Or manipulation of data is happening in the background, making it seem like things are true that are not necessarily true because that data is not being protected well. And using all of this data could lead to real-life problems, right, where you might get, say, denied access to a train or a plane that you want to be getting on to travel because of some either malicious data that was made up about you or because someone decided they just simply didn't like the data they saw about you. This means you could probably be tracked through your daily life. And we know a little about this, right? We know stories about people being tracked by their disgruntled ex or someone famous being tracked by a rabid fan. But imagine if it's not as simple as finding the AirTag in your purse and getting rid of it. What if it's your car that's collecting the information about you, or any of the IoT in your house that's collecting this data that's being used against you? And imagine if the person who's using this data against you isn't a disgruntled ex. What if it's your own country doing that? And the reason Mike and I think about these problems is because they're not going to be limited necessarily to our day-to-day lives. The same sort of things that happen in what we might consider a smart city could happen in what the DoD thinks of as a smart base, right? And they probably have all the same things in a smart base that we have in our smart cities, that wastewater management, air control, and energy management, all those things. But a smart base would also have things like smart warehouses for weapons and biometrics for access control, maybe a smart perimeter that's detecting what's happening around the base, attack detection capabilities. And without a doubt, we all want all of that sort of equipment to be secure. And the way to do that is to secure these things through standards, having these agreed upon ways of knowing that these tools and the communications between them are secure. So what's a standard anyway, right? When most people think about standards, they think about classic standards development organizations. That's places like IETF or IEEE or ISO. You're probably familiar with a lot of these, right? Places where people gather and reach agreements about security and interoperability of these kinds of devices that we're talking about today. When we think about open source, we go a little bit further than that too. We consider open source a standard or a standard supporting tool. A lot of open source products are the first implementation of a standard or the test implementation of a standard, but they have a way of being integrated into standardized products that make them kind of standards in their own right. And of course, there's de facto standards. And that's when you have a product that is so ubiquitous and so well used that everyone else builds to meet the specifications of that product. I was advised by our lawyers that I should not name any of them, but we all probably have a couple that we are familiar with that maybe become de facto standards in a way that having the security baked into that product becomes a way to secure other products as well. And when we think about our smart cities, our smart base examples, all of these types of products will need to be secure in order to have secure implementation of those kinds of structures. This is how we engage in standards at NSA as well. On the far right-hand side, there's our standards development organization engagements. And I know it's a little bit of an eye chart. But we have three main lines of efforts in terms of standards development. One is secure protocols, so securing the communications between computing devices. The other is cloud security, where we seek to secure not only our on-prem clouds through standards, but our tenant clouds environments and the communications between the two. And also telecommunications, so 5G, 6G, next G, whatever G you want to talk about, having that sort of infrastructure secured for DoD use. We engage in open source projects as well in support of those standards initiatives. ORAN and ONAP are two examples of open source projects we engage in. Those are both sort of 5G focused, having a secure open radio access network and secure management of 5G communications systems through ONAP. And of course, we engage directly with industry. And this is a really, really critical point in standards engagement. In the US and in other democracies, standards are an industry-focused effort, right? They're industry-driven. We might provide a customer voice. Other US government agencies and other foreign governments might provide more of a customer voice, what do we want to see in standards? But at the end of the day, our goal is being able to be able to procure products that meet our requirements. And to do that, we need those products to be available for purchase, which means we need to engage with industry, because they're the ones that know that a product could be built and a product could be sold to more than just us, right? It's insufficient for us to have a product that solely meets our needs. We need to have a system of security throughout the world that we depend on. And so engagement with industry is hypercritical for this. At NSA, we engage the industry primarily through our Enduring Security Framework, which is jointly chaired by NSA and CISA. As a way we can sit down with large number of industry collaborators and talk through important security problems we're having and solve them together. A lot of our current ESF engagements are centered around 5G, but Mike and I co-chair a panel on threats to standards. And that work's really been focused on some issues we're seeing in the standards development environment. Because what we're seeing in standards is that while we provide industry or a government voice to industry in these standards environments, we're not the only ones who are doing that. The PRC is leaning into standards in a really big way. And that's a really good thing, actually. We live in an interconnected global environment. I know everyone's phones are coming for this picture. I'll give everyone a second to take that. Our world is very interconnected, and so we need to all share a certain amount of interoperability, no matter where you are in the globe. So having the PRC working in standards development organizations with us is actually a really good end goal. But we also need to consider motivations and standards, like captured in this quote here. And this is from a document that's known in the English-speaking world kind of colloquially as China Standards 2035. That's not the name of the document, but I put it there because I can't pronounce the name of the document. This document says that they want to think about standards management systems with Chinese characteristics. I don't know what the author meant when they wrote that, but I know what it makes me think of. And it makes me think about what would happen in a smart city in an authoritarian government, perhaps that has a social credit system. How would such a government use the information that's collected from such a city? And we don't need to do too much of a thought experiment on this one, too, because we've seen what PRC-backed companies are trying to do in standards. Those who participate in standards might remember the new IP submissions from PRC-backed companies in the IATF. These were standards that were sent to take our current disaggregated internet structure and consolidate it for the purposes of having more of a centralized management of the internet. And you can see how that might be appealing to the PRC, while it's maybe not appealing to democracies around the world. We've witnessed what we call at work procedural shenanigans in standards development organizations, where PRC-backed companies don't break the rules of the SDO, but they do bend them to the greatest extent possible in order to achieve their objectives. And we've seen a large uptick in PRC presence in emerging technology standards. So when we consider all of these things, when we consider the publications that we can read on the PRC's motivation to participate in standards development organizations, we start thinking about what this will mean for our smart cities, both our civilian smart cities and our smart bases. And this is the problem we brought to the Enduring Security Framework, who evaluated a lot of this information and came to the conclusion that the problem isn't like the PRC winning in standards. The problem is the US and other democracies stepping back from standards development and maybe not participating to the extent we need to in order to protect what we would consider democratic norms in standards. So I'm going to leave it here and let Mike talk through the rest of that threat assessment and maybe some solutions that the Enduring Security Framework is considering to tackle this problem. Mike?
All right, thanks, Jess, I appreciate that. So I want to kind of particularize some of what Jess was saying in the framework of standards development. So this picture represents kind of the natural standards development process. You see lots of different voices pushing and pulling in different directions. And some of the things that we get out of standards development, we get interoperability of products. So think about if we were in a situation where HP laptops could only connect to HP servers and Dell laptops to Dell servers. That would be crazy. It would not be a usable internet. We don't get that because in standards, everyone agrees how all these endpoints will interoperate with each other. They'll all function in some sense in the same way. We get certain well-defined functionality. So think about Bluetooth devices. You have a sense whenever you take a Bluetooth device and connect it someplace, you're going to get a certain base level of functionality. Devices might implement other functions, but you know there's a core set of functions that you'll get out of it. We get reduced costs. We put profits up there, but from the consumer point of view, allowing more companies to implement products allows the companies to compete against each other. And standards facilitates that. You define what a product will look like, and then every company can try to compete in that area. And then the big thing from our point of view is security. So if you negotiate into a standard certain base levels of security, you get that regardless of what product you buy. Now, you may still prefer one product over another. It may add higher levels of security, but you at least know that you're going to get a certain level when you interoperate with other products. So those are good things that we get, but we also get bad things. And in particular, you potentially get the ability to do surveillance baked into a product. You may have countries with authoritarian goals that may get all their companies to push in one direction to have functionality that allows them to surveil their citizens. And that's bad enough, but they may also hurt the security of everyone else who's buying products, not just their citizens. So in this picture, we've got many voices pushing in different directions. It's kind of chaotic. I would say that's a good thing when you have that chaos, because it means people are compromising. They're agreeing, hopefully, on, if not the best solution, a good solution. But we see the red arrow of one unified voice pushing in one direction, and in this case, in a bad direction. And that voice can become overwhelming, and it could block out some of the other things, but at the very least, it ends up kind of getting its goal, surveillance in this case. So I just want to sum up by saying a healthy standards ecosystem can't look like one nation pursuing its own goals to the detriment and exclusion of other goals. Okay. So Jess had mentioned that the problem isn't so much that the PRC has pushed forward and stepped up. It's also democratic nations stepping back. And this graph illustrates that. So first off, standards essential patents. These are patents that are required to implement a given standard. Companies that are working on the standard in an SDO, a standards development organization, they're forced to declare any patents they might have that you need to implement the standard. And then, when the standard is being implemented, they are free to license that. As a matter of fact, they have agreed to license that fairly to everyone, including competitors. So this sort of has two effects. One is an economic effect, and that is, if you're licensing technology to another company, you get to collect money. That's good for your company, kind of in the aggregate, it's good for your nation, right? But the other effect is, a standards essential patent is a way of locking in a feature into a standard so that every product that implements that standard has that feature. And so when we look at this, we see, if I can interpret a little, because I don't know how visible that is in the back, you see all these colored lines that represent the standards essential patents declared in ETSI related to 5G. So you can see most of the lines are kind of like more or less tracking at the same slope. This is cumulative, so as you would expect, it's growing over time. But you notice that the declarations from the region of China are kind of taking off ahead of everyone. They were lagging at one point, and now they're overtaking them. The situation is actually a little worse than what it appears. When you look at older technology from 2017, and I know that doesn't sound like a long time ago, but some of that stuff is kind of aging out. It's still in networks, still being used, but as new products are being built, some of those things are kind of going away and becoming obsolete. They're probably becoming optional in the standard and eventually, may not be implemented. So really, the old things are kind of dropping off and newer declarations are taking over. Okay, so Jess told you about the Threats to Standards panel that she and I are running in ESF. The group has been meeting for several months, and they've identified quite a few threats, as well as some recommended solutions. So I'm just going to go over 6 of the prominent threats and then talk about possible solutions. Okay, so showing up too late to the table. The US and its allies are engaging late in a lot of places, including in smart cities where the technology is largely being developed in countries that are not democratic. Lack of experts. So when you think about it, it's hard to be an expert in a new technology, right? You really have to be one of the people developing that technology and then on the ground floor. But you really need to be an expert, and you need to commit to doing the research and development so that you are in on the ground floor so you can get your intellectual property into standards. Bad behavior. So most of the standards organizations that we're involved in have some kind of code of conduct. And it's really not rocket science. It's really things that you probably learned in kindergarten or should have. And it's things like don't be a bully, don't harass, don't shout people down, listen. Unfortunately, a lot of times these behaviors show up in standards bodies. There is bullying. there is a tendency for some of the larger voices to shout down other voices. And whenever this happens, you kind of weed out other points of view. People aren't willing to express their opinions. Maybe people stop participating. And I would say you get a poor result because of that. Stacking the deck. So standards development organizations vary in how they make decisions. Some of them are by rough consensus. That is a sense of where most of the people want something to go. Not just a simple majority necessarily, but like the preponderance of people. The IETF is very famous for taking a hum in a room. So when a decision's about to be made, they will ask for a hum and they will listen to see which side is getting the loudest. They also follow that up with a vote on the mailing list. So other groups actually do a vote, a majority vote or a total consensus vote. And regardless of which of these things is being done, a company that's trying to push an agenda can send an army of people into the SDO meeting and have them all vote in one way. Some standards organizations actually have defenses against this. You can file a complaint if you feel like there's a colluding block of people, but some really just allow the votes to go through without any real inspection. Okay, weak leaders. So a strong leader could mitigate against a lot of the things that I was just talking about. They could notice groups colluding to vote, they could notice bullying, that kind of thing, and put a stop to it. But we don't always have those types of leaders in standards bodies. Honestly, leadership positions are kind of voluntary, other duties as assigned sorts of things for people who work in companies. They may have a hard time negotiating to reduce kind of the tasks of their day job to even do it. And so they make a best effort, but sometimes that effort is not enough to handle situations like this. So what ends up happening is the leader doesn't set the agenda, but the people who are carrying out kind of these bad behaviors either explicitly get to or implicitly by steering things how they want. And finally, this is a little bit different from stacking the deck, but block voting. Think of this kind of at a national level or groups of nations. You don't just have one company instructing their people how to vote, but you have collusion among companies in one nation. And this really doesn't tend to happen in democratic nations because, as Jess said, the policies of those nations are usually that standards are industry-led. And so, a given company is not going to vote the way their country tells them to do. They're going to vote in their own interest. Okay, so those were kind of the big threats that we identified in the panel. And now here's some potential solutions. So the first one's kind of obvious, right? You have weak leaders, you want strong ones. Increase the leadership and influence consistent with democratic norms. So not only choose leaders who will enforce those norms, but grow participants who can move into those leadership positions. I would say this is actually kind of a pipeline thing. You need to be building these people up from the beginning. As they come into a standards body, help them move forward, help them develop, taking on editorships on standards and moving into work group leaders. Jess mentioned new IP. This was an example actually where the IETF and a couple other standards organizations actually demonstrated strong leadership in that they noticed that there were some themes running through several standards and several work groups that were really inconsistent with the goals of the larger group. And so the leaders did get together and say, we need to watch out for this, there's something going on, and they successfully pushed back on it. Okay, so engage early in standards. So I'm going to focus on security here. It's hard to add security at the very end. It needs to be at the beginning of the process. We know this because we tried in 5G standards, showing up very late to the game and not really being all that successful in getting security built in that ought to be there. So need to get involved early, be on the ground floor, and especially engage actively while you're there. Okay, mentor new participants. So cultures of SDOs are kind of weird. I mean, each one has its own characteristics, and it takes time to figure out how you can be effective and how to achieve goals that you want to. So we have a rule in our standards center that we never send a new participant to a first meeting by themselves. As a matter of fact, usually any meeting we tend to go in pairs, but especially a new participant, we go along to mentor them, to help them meet people, help them understand how things are done in the SDO. I would take it a step further though. Help the people in your company, yes, but mentor other people who are showing up for the first time. I hate to keep going back to the IETF, but that's one we're very familiar with. They have lots of programs to help new members develop. They have receptions, they have tutorials on the first day. That's a really healthy thing, and I think really any SDO should do that. Okay, so standards development can take years, it's expensive. I would say mostly it's expensive in the time that people put into the work. In the long run though, being there, staying engaged, actually has big strategic and economic benefits. And so you need to be there with a commitment to see it through to the end. Okay. Academia is actually a very important part of standards development. We tend to focus on government and industry, but a lot of professors at universities also engage, sometimes just out of a deep interest in the subject matter, sometimes to get their own intellectual property in. But I would take it a step further and say, we really need to get more students involved. And I would say there are a few things we could do about that. One, and this is something that our standards panel is really advocating for, let's get a curriculum at universities that at least exposes students to standards development. Speaking for myself, I had no idea when I graduated college that there was even this concept of standards, or that you could go to a meeting and develop standards or anything like that. Let's make sure students know about it, know how it affects the field they're working in, and see that they could get involved. Show them the pathway to it. So I would say further though, look for opportunities to bring those students to SDO meetings. Maybe consider sponsoring a student to be there. The SDO could do that. Other companies could. Or maybe create events at standards development meetings where students can be involved, like through a hackathon, writing some code to implement a standard and making it work with other people's code. And finally, be a leader. So let's not get reactive to the threats we see. It would be easy to just say, I see that threat, I'm going to try and stop it. We need to think strategically, though, about what our long-term investment is, the technologies and security we want to see, and the world that we want to see built around it. And I would say primarily, be a leader by bringing good work to SDOs. Don't be spending all your time slapping down bad things you see, but actually, bring positive things to it. Okay, so to sum up the talk, I would say first off, watch out for national voting blocks and unified national agendas. When you see something like that, there's a good chance that something's going on not in your interest. Number two, as we saw in the Smart Cities vignette, threats to standards for critical technologies are actually threats to all of us. And so we all need to unify against them. Number three, diverse viewpoints lead to better standards. And so let's make sure that we're hearing from everyone. And then finally, let's all be involved. We don't all have to agree, but a robust discussion improves the outcome. So let me hand back to Jess and see if she has a call to action, what we should be doing about this.
I sure do, Mike. So, based on all the threats and the proposed solutions Mike discussed, we want to be sure that you know specifically how you and your company can get involved in implementing some of these solutions. And the very first thing we suggest is to kind of assess where your company is right now in standards development and advocate for those resources you need to get more engaged or get engaged in new places. While you're building your case for that, you should consider how your development your research development could inform standards, because there is a lot of benefit to bringing the new idea, right, down the road. Being the first implementer, the early adopter of these standards really can reap rewards for your company. There are a lot of communities of interest you can get involved in. We'll talk through a couple on the next slide, but any place where people are sharing information about a technology and the standards landscape evolving around it is probably a place you want to be involved in. And like Mike said, it's absolutely critical to support new employees or students who might become your employees to become engaged in standards development. We found in our experience that having the longevity of experience in an SDO is absolutely critical to wielding the most influence there. So getting started early in a career is really, really helpful to building that kind of reputation. So critical standards development activities are going on right now. If you are interested in post-quantum or post-quantum cryptography and its inclusion in protocols, we can point you to the right folks to get in touch with on that. Cloud security automation is super hot right now. So I know everyone has a stake in that game, so a lot of that work is happening in ISO, in the Cloud Security Alliance. There's a lot of places we can point you to if that's your interest area. 5G standards and also the coming developments for like what will 6G be, those conversations are happening at this moment. So if you're interested in what the next evolution of telecom will be, going and being involved in your nation's representation to ITU is probably going to be a conversation you want to be a part of, and we can help you get started there. Every other talk at RSA is about AI/ML, and you probably can't get into them anymore. I know, because I tried yesterday. But AI/ML security and the trustworthiness of AI is going to be important to reaping the rewards of AI implementations in your company. We know that NIST is doing a ton of thought leadership on this activity right now. So if that's a topic of interest to you, there's plenty of work happening. And of course, smart cities and industrial control systems. We feel that is kind of a place where all of these standards ideas are going to align. So if that's of interest to you, we can help you get started. If you have any additional, need any resources on this, please reach out to me or to Mike or to our broader team. And we're happy to take any questions you might have right now. Yeah, come on up.
Hi, I'm Ed Lewis. I'm the Chief Security Architect, Northrop Grumman. Previous lives, I've actually worked with you guys on development standards, and it was a good experience, and I think that's a very good overview of the problem space, what you have to deal with. So my compliments to that. That's very sincere.
Thank you.
My challenge is this, and there's going to be a couple of parts of this question, so please forgive me. But first, the technology in many of these areas is very, very rapidly occurring. So a 2, 3, 4, 5-year development cycle to get a standard out is kind of moot, because by the time it hits the ground and gets approved, no one's, it's OBE. It's may apply on the tail end technologies that are being end of life, but it's not going to be very germane. So accelerating the deployment of standards is a challenge. The second thing tied in with that, and I'll be 3, I promise, and I'll stop. But the second thing is with this creation of standards for the contracting community, for what you outlined for the government, it's very easy for a White House memo or whatever to say, thou shalt do this, make it happen, zero trust, and I'll go back to that. You have 5 years, or depending on who you're talking to, DOD, CIO, maybe 2024, but you know, you've got that. But for industry and contractors and such, there's no, unless it's in a contract, there's no direct mandate to adopt a standard of any shape, form, or fashion until it comes into some type of regulatory contractual clause add-in. And I'm going to use what industry generally refers to the DFARS that implemented 800-171R2 or RX. So, second thing, so acceleration was the first. The third one, or second one was, what are your thoughts, or are there plans to start moving some of these into a regulatory structure? And I realize that's problematic at all sorts of levels. But the last one, which is, I think, probably more germane to everyone on this, at least in my mind, is the zero trust requirements. From government, we have DHS and we have the DODs. Personally, I'm in favor of the DODs because they take a lot of ambiguity out of the discussion, which if you've had to have lots of discussions on security, that works for me. It does. But along those lines, we've got the capabilities and activities coming out of the DoD CIO Zero Trust Office. They're good. I think they're very valid, but not really, it's kind of vague from a standards implementation or requirement standpoint. So, do you have any comments on those three elements?
I've got a couple things I could say on the second two at
Good,
least,
because I had a joint answer for 1 and 3.
Okay.
Oh my God, we're so good at this.
You start.
Okay. So, I completely hear what you're saying about the standards lifecycle. I have a standard I have been in the process of writing since 2016, and it's about to be published. I'm like, praise God. You're right. It is a process. I would like to challenge, though, the assumption that you can't get in on what you will eventually be required to do. Because your questions 1 and 3 were kind of the same, right? There's a certain amount of, you have to build the standard. In the meantime, technology is going on. You're not wrong. Like, things are progressing anyway, right? But at the end of the day, there's going to be someone like me and Mike writing some memo somewhere that's like, and now you have to do the standard we wrote. So that kind of early engagement in standards, you absolutely will be able to influence what pops out on the other end of it. And I think that sometimes we get so focused on the length of time between the two endpoints that we lose sight of the fact that the work is going on all through that middle. And so you're never going to have a choice to not use like the next version of TLS, right? Whether you're in the room or not, eventually that is coming at you. Whether you
TLS,
or not.
yeah, that one,
Right.
that one I get.
Yeah.
DevSecOps,
Right,
that's
and
different
to your point about zero trust, right? We're kind of in, I consider a standards lifecycle phase of like, you know, these things reach that sort of peak of interest, and that's when we start writing memos and don't necessarily have the right standards to point to. Somewhere, it's like the Gartner lifecycle, you know? Somewhere
Gartner
it
curve,
settles out
yeah.
where we get into this phase where you are actually being required to implement the appropriate standards. I know a lot of zero trust standardization work is happening right now in terms of zero trust for cloud security and zero trust for telecommunications. So I think we are actually in a phase where we are still building those standards that will eventually make the
NIST
regulations
207 has
yeah.
some very good quality
Oh, yeah. Yes.
into it.
And a lot of the work I'm seeing in international standards bodies is taking what NIST has said to do and requiring them in standards where, you know, the manufacturer has to adhere to them. So I think, yeah, I stand by our earlier statements that early engagement in standards is as important to folks who end up on the requirements end of things as everyone else.
Yeah, and as usual, Jess stole some of what I said.
Sorry.
But now, you know, we have these ideas of zero trust in the abstract.
Yeah.
We're seeing them move into other standards efforts. We actually had been trying to push it in 3GPP
Yep.
for 5G standards without immediate success, but we're still pushing to get it. So I think that's maybe where you'll start to see real requirements, because I mean, the 5G systems are like fielded systems that, you know, you're going to have to do it there. I would say in the, like, how do you start requiring it? We actually have a very small implementation team in our standards center that like tries to pursue ways to, okay, the standard's done, now what? How do we make get people, I was going to say make people, how do we induce people to use the standard? And that's something we need to do a better job of, but we actually do engage with the DoD CIO's office, and we have some small efforts where we've tried to get things into regulations and so forth. So,
And on Zero Trust specifically, we can get you in touch with the right people. I'm trying super hard to not make eye contact with them right now, but we can get you in touch with the right guy to talk to you more about that.
yeah.
Sorry, Andy.
I think we have a question over there.
Thank you. You had a note on one of your slides that national voting blocks pose a threat to the security of international standards.
Yes.
I may be paraphrasing that a little bit, but that was the intent. I think the keyword missing there is adversarial nation states, or some aspect there. The standards essential patents graph is a classic. By the way, I should introduce myself. I'm Mike Bergman. I'm with the Consumer Technology Association. I'm a standards professional. I'm vice president of technology and standards at an
great.
ANSI accredited standards body. My colleague is president of the U.S. National Committee for IEC. Another colleague at CTA is president of SES. We're kind of in this space. We're not engaged with ESF, other than through ITSCC and CSCC updates. So this international aspect, if you look at that classic chart that you showed, China has something like 34,000 standard essential patents as of the last update. The United States has 26, South Korea has 23, EU has 16. And it looks bad, but then if you say, well, what's the Western Bloc versus China? And it's kind of a different picture. So I know you're not, I want to say oblivious or blind to the fact that it's an international picture.
Right.
I'm curious if you could comment on things like China is not going to change the way they run their government, their state capitalist approach to running government.
Right.
And they're not going to allow international standards to cause a problem with that. So we're looking at either a significant impact of China's governance style on international standards or fragmentation of the internet. Your recommendations were sort of domestic. So can you comment on how the United States, as a member of the sort of Western Bloc at the international stage, thinks about this? And thank you.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think what I would start with is there is no block in standards where everyone who is aligned with a democratic nation is pulling in the same direction. Like Mike says, it's chaos, and that's a good thing. It's chaotic because everyone's bringing their own ideas to the table, and it creates an environment where, in its best possible form, the best ideas float to the top. There is none of that sort of all rowing in the same direction that we see from the PRC. And that is actually okay. That is not bad. The chaos is good. More what we want to drive towards is having greater chaos, more points of view, more of that conversation from folks who care about the cost and the operability and the functionality and the security to start leveling out the conversation where it's not being overrun by that pull all in one direction out of the PRC. I think that was only a partial answer to the question. Did you want to?
Yeah, I guess I would also chime in and say we're looking for some ways maybe to kind of expose where we see kind of that one loud unified voice to let people know, hey, you don't have to all vote with us.
Right.
You make your own decisions. But here's what's happening to you, and you need to be prepared to react to that.
Yeah.
And I would also say, we kind of swept this under the rug a little bit. There are standards organizations where the members are companies. There are some international standards organizations that are country-based, and it might be worthwhile having discussions there among allied nations about what as a matter of fact, these happen, but what are our positions and how do we want to vote? Maybe not as a block, but understand where it's kind of in all of our best interests to be voting in the same way.
You mentioned that our recommendations were domestic, and that was on purpose, right? Again, the findings from our panel was that this is not a problem of the PRC winning, but us needing to do more. So they're domestic, or hopefully the message was received that it's more for anyone who cares about maintaining these democratic norms and standards. I would challenge the assumption, though, that there's nothing that does but bifurcate the standards development environment, because in my opinion, I think someone who wants a more authoritarian regime could be forced into bolting that on at the back, the way that we often in the US have to bolt security on at the end. If we have this strong security drive in standards development, they can be forced to bolt their authoritarianism on at the back, and that's really the solution we're looking for.
But we do agree, we don't want a bifurcated standard system.
not
We
at
don't
all.
think that's in our best interest. Yes.
Hi, Duncan Sparrow, longtime standards participant, 42 years doing standards, involved in various standards organizations, including some de jure ones. Work with your team, for example, in the ITU and OASIS and other places. So first of all, thank you for your talk. You're saying things I have been saying actually for quite a long time, so I'm glad the U.S. government is finally recognizing it. But I see a problem with some of your solutions. Because my opinion is the root problem is standards are a long-term strategic thing, and as the speaker who was right before me, the speaker is companies only care about this quarter. They don't care about 10 years from now, 15 years from now. Most standards are really setting the stage for in the future. In many of the bodies I'm involved in, the Chinese now run it all. It used to be we run it all. I'm literally in ITU Study Group 17, the only really senior U.S. person who still attends, and that's because nobody goes because it's a long-term thing. So how is the U.S. government going to help with these sort of long-term aspects? Because it's really not in, you ask the companies to basically, hey, go spend money because you want to do something for 10 years from now. They just won't do it. You need to incent them to do that.
Yeah, and I didn't want to be a gloomy Gus, but like asking companies to do that right now with the economy like sort of
In
iffy.
this economy?
It's not like the golden time to do that, right?
So this is almost, I'm worried people are going to think you're a plant, Duncan. This is very timely because the U.S. is publishing its standard strategy, like maybe now, I don't know, like any second now. And so I hope that you'll keep an eye out for that because yes, I think without giving the game away, a lot of that strategy is centered on exactly that question. Like this, what we have here is a lot of good ideas, and how to get that done, I think, is going to be fully covered in the execution of that strategy. So.
I look forward to it and
Yeah.
hopefully can help with it.
Yeah, and actually, and I would encourage, after you read it, if you have thoughts, reach out. Well,
Yeah.
reach out to them, but also reach out to us
Yes,
if you want a discussion.
absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Melanie Anderson, and I'm from the Communications Security Establishment. My team works very closely with your team, and just want to say thank you so much for the talk. From my perspective as an ally, being from Canada, what, in your experience, noting that we are all limited with resources, and I love your recommendations about bringing students and mentoring and all of those pieces, because I think they're critical for the success and the retention of the talent that we have in our community. In terms of coordination and understanding some of the threats that we're facing, what are your recommendations to be able to partner better together with our allies and nations that are thinking along the same lines in terms of baking security in early?
And Melanie,
you.
just a shout out, we had a couple CSC participants in the
Yes.
ESF panel that we led
Yes,
too. So.
yes. Yeah, and I think this is so much easier for us, right? Because we have those Five Eyes and the O5 relationships to draw from. And I know there's a couple of really good centers of gravity in those Five Eyes communities where folks will meet pre and post meetings to talk through these things. I think the thing that I would like to see grow, well, two things I'd like to see grow. There are more democracies than just the Five Eyes, and we need to start getting more engagement more broadly because these are not issues that we can tackle in our O5 or Five Eyes communities alone. But also, I think we need to find ways to bring in those industry-focused conversations, not just government to government. We're good at government to government, but standards is an industry-driven activity. And so having those greater communications there, I think, is going to be critical going forward, too. So maybe we can pick your brain afterwards on how to best execute that, because I think it's absolutely critical. Other questions? We have one more minute. Thank you guys so much for your time. While I'm still here on the stage, I'll pitch that these are topics of interest to you. There are a couple other talks you probably want to see. NSA's Secure Protocols team is going to be discussing common myths about post-quantum migration Wednesday morning, 8:30. That's a standards activity that we're all very passionate about, and we'd love to have you there. One of our NSA cryptographic SMEs is going to be, a subject matter expert, is going to be at our booth Wednesday at 10 o'clock talking about post-quantum cryptography as well. And of course, the chief of CSD has a couple of talks, but I would highly recommend the State of the Hack if you have an opportunity to attend that keynote. We think it'll be very fun. Thank you for your time and attention. We appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.